In the latest developments from the Democratic Republic of Congo, ICC Chief Prosecutor Karim said international courts have failed to stop 3 decades of atrocities in the conflict-torn eastern DRC. Later, he added that DRC needs a special tribunal to deal with the ongoing atrocities. Meanwhile, the UK has suspended all aid to Rwanda, causing a wave of concern in its citizens. This sudden suspension of aid has indirectly been in favour of M23 rebels, increasing the chances of hostility. Joining us first to discuss this topic, we're joined by Dr. Charles Sinkala, who's an international relations consultant who is joining us from Cape Town. Thank you, Dr. Sinkala, for joining us. The warnings are there from the ICC. The geopolitical warnings and concern over this issue are, of course, rising. But what, in your opinion, needs to be done in the short term to stop the humanitarian crises and the deaths that we're seeing?
Yes, it is quite important. Thank you very much for having me. It is quite important to look at the aspects of the impact in terms of the legal jurisdiction. And the international law has specified in terms of the United Nations that peace must be, portrayed to an extent that it does not violate any human rights.
Thank you, Dr. Sinkala, for that. Also, sticking with the South African sort of aspect of this, there are troops, of course. We know that there are troops that have been in the Democratic Republic of Congo, but 127 of those are set to be evacuated from the front lines. What impact could this have, and where else will troops come from to try and keep the peace in the region?
The de-escalation of military support in DRC will actually help in the healing process, as in the past 60 years, we have seen the rise in escalation of military support to DRC without any reason or room for the stop to the violence and the conflicts, which started the year back in 1961 when the Patrice Emery Lumumba was eliminated and replaced by Mobutu Sese Seko Kumbendo Mwazambanga as the president of that country, who presided over that nation at the expense of the Congolese. And we also saw subsequent to that in 1996, 1997, the Congo War, when actually the president of DRC, Laurent Kabila, was killed, and and many other aspects of escalation. There is also about 150 military support that has been in DRC for over this period, notwithstanding the fact of the celebrities. We've always been talking about the M23 who has actually been identified, but we've got a lot of mercenaries, we've got the United Nations peacekeeping missions, and as well as the regional organizations.
Yes, also joining us to discuss the ever-evolving situation in the Democratic Republic of Congo is Shyam Batra, who is an international affairs expert joining us from London. Thank you very much for your time. We need to look at the UK and their role in this. Of course, the Rwanda deal that was providing money to the Rwandan government for the proposed deportation of migrants has seen hundreds of millions of pounds travel to the African nation. Keir Starmer saying that funding and any funding to Rwanda will stop. But is the impact there a responsibility that the UK should look at amongst other nations at how this situation has sort of got to the position that it is in?
Thanks for having me. I have a slight cough, so do forgive me. I think the Rwanda deal was a joke. It was a complete, utter joke. It never got off the ground, even though there was talk of the planes leaving and everything else. And why would people want to go there, with all due respect? But there was no real agreement set up in place. So, I mean, in terms of, I think Starmer said that he was going to continue it, but he never did. But the problem lies more deeply, as your colleague said, about the M23 rebels, who are gaining a lot of momentum at the moment in the country. I think they've taken another city, haven't they, in the last day or so. And they're moving ahead. But the problem is there's no policing as such. There's no military, there's no policing. And this goes back to Trump's words about having put away money from governments for this type of problem that may happen in the future, especially with Africa the way it is. It is not policed or run in a way. I mean, I can only see that the Rwanda story. I mean, I think that the M23 rebels are making huge advancement, and they may take over. Who knows? But it has to stop. Now, America is not involving itself. The UK has just stopped aid, suspension of all aid, and punitive, Rwanda says. So, because the Rwandan scheme never really got off the ground, it doesn't solve matters if there is a war going on as well, you know, and you're all close countries. But I always say it's better to negotiate than it is to continue with this sort of nonsense. You know, the rebels are making headway. Who is talking about that at the moment? And who is stopping it? South Africa's lost some people. They've all disappeared. How does Congo defend itself is the question. And how big is the army to fight these rebels?
Yes, staying with you, Shyam, of course there have been incidents of infighting between government-backed forces, but it seems that there needs to be, as you've mentioned already, a serious international effort to stop this. But where is that going to come from? You've mentioned already the US, of course, with their aid policies. Sir Keir Starmer's mentioned as well that aid will stop. But with the humanitarian crisis, we're seeing children being killed, the rape of children and women across the region, not just from M23 and rebel forces, also from fighters on the side of the DRC government. So the situation is dire, the humanitarian situation is getting worse day by day. Whose responsibility is it to make sure this stops?
Well, you see, Africa as a continent has 54 countries. If the Africans are not compiling together and helping when something like this happens, because Africa's always been a continent that no one really looks at. When the COVID happened, they'd hardly got hit. But of human aid, etc., humanitarian aid. I mean, I've read, obviously, rape has taken place and children disappearing and all this other stuff. Again, this is what happens in a war. But you've got to stop it. You've got to start negotiations from day one. I mean, if Zelensky started negotiations from day one with Putin, we wouldn't be here 3 years later, because he ran everywhere and said, oh, I need money, I want to fight these people, I want to do this, I want to do that. But you need manpower, strength. I mean, in our country, probably like most countries, and I'm not sure about Africa, we have these foot soldiers that have been placed in hotels everywhere, across our whole country. And we don't even know if they're going to turn on us, but they're here. They're in India, they're in everywhere else, and I don't know if they're in Africa. So if you're going to start a war, then you've got to finish it. But the idea is to not even go down that road. I'm happy to do negotiations. If anybody wants me from the Congo Republic, from the DRC, to talk and to try and battle this out, because you need to talk about things. If you don't, it's a game over.
Dr. Sinkala, looking at those talks and looking at some African unity, is that something that you think is a viable option? And if so, who's going to need to take charge of those talks to make sure that a real peace or some form of peace is forged, meaning that there is no death and destruction and humanitarian crises like we're seeing?
I think he's disappeared, has he?
I'll throw that question to you, please, Shyam. We seem to have lost there. So, which African nation? Which African nation do you think needs to take the mantle here and really make sure that there is unity across those more than 50 nations, as you've already mentioned?
I think we've got to reach out to the 54 nations and say to them, I mean, Nigeria is one of them to start. And Congo is a mineral war. This is the only reason why the rebels are jumping, because they know they can get the minerals. This is always about land, etc. So in between all of that. But I think that we need to get somebody like South Africa, Nigeria, and maybe a couple of other big ones to come on board and to negotiate this war down. And send troops over there as peacekeeping troops for the moment. The United Nations are clearly not going to help. It's inevitable that there needs to be a peacekeeping mission. This just can't carry on destruction and killing innocent children. I made a charter for the UN, which never even got anywhere, I don't think, about women and children must always be evacuated from a country and put into a safe place, given money, given housing, and they're safe. And if there's a war to take place, then so be it. But at least the women are not damaged or the children are not trafficked and other stuff. But these are the small things. It's called common sense. But governments, officials, prime ministers, presidents do not even tackle common sense. And this is what frustrates me here in my country, when we've got a government that nobody wants, and they're doing what they want to do when democratically we voted for them and said, do this for us. They work for us, we don't work for them. But when you've got Africa, it's a different breed, because no one's really tackled Africa. And there needs to be a strong community build. All the countries. I mean, imagine the business that they could do between each other instead of fighting wars. I mean, this is a mineral war, and it's going to continue till they take what they want. And they'll take power at the same time. And the world is watching.
Absolutely, the world is watching, and we will of course bring you all the latest as it happens. But thank you, Shyam Batra, and also thank you, Dr. Sinkala, for joining us.